Today I'm happy to say we're talking with Jeff Erickson. Jeff is one of the founders of RotoWire.com, and he's also a long-time scoresheet player. I believe this year he has 4 teams with us. Jeff, how are you today?
Doing good. Just got my results. Got a shutout win when I started pitcher AAA, so hey, can't complain too much, right?
You must have an awesome defense.
Nah, I think it was blind squirrels and acorns there. Then I turned around and got beat by another pitcher AAA later in the week, so obviously I'm not that good. But no, it's it was a good week for most of my teams. There's one team that's just an utter disaster, but that's okay.
Well, if you got 4 teams and only one had a bad week, you're doing a lot better than I'm doing recently.
It's cyclical though too. I mean, especially when you get in some of these dynasty leagues, and all of my leagues are dynasty leagues. And none of them are redraft leagues. So you're going to go through the cycles where you win one year and then you have to kind of retrench. I kind of sold out. Flags fly forever, right? So sometimes you sell out a lot of picks, and then you have to kind of turn around and rebuild.
Yeah, I agree. If you can win a title, you got to go for it. And we're actually starting to get to that point in the season now that we're done 8 weeks where teams are going to have to decide if this is the year that they want to go for it, or if this is the year they want to trade away some of the older guys and build for next year.
Indeed. And the key injuries often play a role in that decision-making process. The one league that is a disaster, I've got Jorge De La Rosa, and that's not so good. I'm sure everybody that's a Buster Posey owner right now is scrambling to figure out what they're going to do. I mean, if you're kind of on that ledge, that pushes you one way or another.
Yeah, and you lose a guy like a catcher, like a Posey, or all these third basemen that are down. It's hard to replace. It's not like losing a first baseman where you can just find someone else that'll put up nearly as good a numbers.
Oh, exactly. And and third base. I mean, what sort of attrition have we had there this year? I mean, between we've had guys that either Longoria on the DL already is back, but David Wright on there now. So many guys that are hurt. In a lot of these leagues, we're kind of finding ourselves saying, Ryan Roberts looks really good right now. And then the other guys are totally slumping too, like Edwin Encarnacion. I mean, we all know that he's not a viable player in the field, but at least sometimes you might pick him up for that bat. No homer so far. What good is he? And if he's not, if you can't use him defensively and you can't start him even as a DH, why bother having him? And there's a lot of these third base guys that are like that. They're just killing people this year.
Yeah, no, it's a very thin position, and when you find yourself having to move a shortstop or second base to third just so you have a guy there, you're playing a guy who traditionally is a pretty weak hitter from the middle infield. Now you're playing in a place where you'd like to have 25, 30 home runs.
Yeah, moreover, and you got the penalty for playing a guy out of place. I mean, obviously, if you're moving a middle infielder there as opposed to any other guy, it's not as much, not quite as punitive, I'm guessing. But I'm sure you see this all the time too in the score sheet. How does the score sheet really, how strong of a penalty is it to maybe move a guy from middle infield to third base, even though he doesn't necessarily qualify there?
It's not, especially to move a shortstop. The defensive penalty isn't much. We've always figured that anyone that can play shortstop in the major leagues can pretty much play third base in the major leagues. And also, we feel if you're having to play a guy from a traditional weak hitting position like shortstop at third, you're already suffering some sort of a penalty. It's going the other way that's really
of course
brutal.
Yeah, as the Giants are finding out, right?
Yeah, when you're trying to play a Miguel Tejada, who I guess technically plays shortstop at short, you're hurting. But then when you're having to play Mike Fontenot or Mark DeRosa or something like that at shortstop, you're not getting much of a bat and your pitchers are suffering. It's pretty tough.
All this focus on Posey getting hurt. Fontenot getting hurt actually hurts the Giants quite a bit. Now they're locked into playing Tejada, really. I mean, with both DeRosa and Fontenot on the DL now, I mean, they're just hosed. I mean, at least the one thing I'll say from if you're a Giants fan, at least most of their pitchers are fly ball pitchers, so it could be even worse. Think if you had like the St. Louis Cardinals staff and you put Tejada at shortstop. I can't imagine the carnage.
I'd like to think that the Giants front office was smart enough when they signed Tejada to know that they had a lot of strikeout pitchers and fly ball pitchers. Because I was thinking when they signed him that if you depend on pitching to win, what you really don't want to have is a horrible shortstop.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe they figure Lincecum will just start striking out 18, 19 guys every single game, and then the shortstop won't matter. But between Posey going down and Tejada struggling and Fontenot getting hurt and DeRosa getting hurt, they're going to have to throw an awful lot of shutouts, I think.
Yeah, they might get better defensively. They just called up that kid Crawford. Maybe he'll play a little better defense at short, and they can put Tejada back over at third. But the other thing is interesting is they called up Belt, and we were talking about this on the air today. Is how they're going to make room for all this to work. How where does Belt squeeze in? Who is the guy that loses the time? Obviously, he's got to play. They've been playing him a lot in the outfield. The Aubrey Huff thing in right field was an unmitigated disaster. So they have to figure out. Is it going to be Cody Ross that sits? Is it going to be Pat Burrell that sits? I'm guessing it's going to be Burrell more often than not.
Yeah, I think Burrell isn't really, he's arguably the worst outfielder in baseball,
Ever?
except for possibly that guy on your Reds team, that Johnny Gomes.
Yeah.
Those two have to be about tied. So,
Lonnie Skate Smith, things like that.
Yeah. So, that's one thing we wanted to emphasize when we started Score Sheet was that defense matters, because in real life, certainly there are lineup decisions made by GMs and managers where defense is a key part of the decision. And so, rotisserie, of course, is nice, but it doesn't have anything fielding range built in. So, as you said, if you're playing Score Sheet, if you can't, if you lose a shortstop or second baseman, just willy-nilly plug a third baseman in at shortstop without suffering the same kind of penalty that maybe the Mets did way back when we started when they played Howard Johnson at shortstop.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
I do.
The numbers we got, I remember we were coming up with fielding ranges back in those days, and we were called one stat company said, this has to be a mistake. Because his numbers, it's just incredible how few balls he got to.
Yeah. You don't even get to the past a diving Jeter. You get past a leaning Johnson. But anyhow, and that's one of the things I love about Score Sheet is, like you said, defense does matter. When we play Roto, sure, you could try to incorporate errors, but we all know how imperfect fielding position is. Fielding percentage is. We could talk about putouts or assists and things like that, but that doesn't come close to encapsulating range and all that. So I'm glad that you guys do that. I love that. I love that on-base percentage matters. I like that you don't have to chase saves or wins. You're just chasing good pitchers, and that's one of the real reasons I really love Score Sheet is you're just trying to find good ball players.
Yeah, I had a guy call me yesterday that said he'd never played Score Sheet but wanted to pick up an orphan team because he had read about us, and he said, well, so if I want to rebuild the team, what should I concentrate on? Is it going to be a whole year of a learning curve because all I know is Roto? And I said, well, I think if you just pretend you're a real-life GM and you don't worry about trying to win a category, but instead you try to put together guys you'd like to see on your favorite real-life team, you'll probably do fine, which, in some sense makes Score Sheet a little easier than maybe playing rotisserie, because you can just concentrate on the real baseball stats that are important, like on-base percentage or ERA, and not worry too much about whether somebody else is 2 steals behind you or not.
Oh, exactly. Steals and saves are the worst. Always have been. But in fact, I've that and bat. I'd say a third category is batting average. If I ruled the rotisserie world and could get rid of it, but actually I get rid of wins before that too. I'd rather have on base than batting, but no one ever listens to that. So you just plug away, and that's why you have this format. And I like Stratomatic does simulation, but it's always backward looking. Plus, I'll be honest. I just you can I don't necessarily like. The one thing I don't like about Strat is trying to read the cards the right way, whereas it's, the dice roll cards. Whereas, with Score Sheet, you're just trying to read real life stats, and it's a different, different strokes for different folks, right?
Yeah, I'm not trying to say rotisserie can't be fun. Of course, it's fun for.
I love it too, but it's just imperfect. That's all.
It's a different thing. Pitcher wins were the one I could never get, because when I used to play a fair amount of rotisserie, well, not a fair amount, but I played some. I always came from a Score Sheet perspective, so I draft guys that had good ERAs, and then someone would point out that I drafted an Astro, and Houston would probably only win 55 games that year, and it was going to be pretty hard for my pitcher to get a win.
Right, exactly. But you know what? Funny things work. Sometimes it still works out, and that it doesn't necessarily tie. I mean, you could have lack of run support for that one particular pitcher. You could have bad bullpen support for that one particular pitcher. And you can have like the 1 year Steve Carlton won like 30 games and the team won 60. I mean, it can still happen, but it's just it's harder. You're right.
Yeah, it's a little different. So speaking of statistics and all, back when you started. Well, what's now RotoWire, but was Roto News. And when we started Score Sheet 25 years ago, everybody was still using pretty much the same basic statistics they'd used for 60, 80 years. On base, or not on base, I mean batting average and pitcher wins. And obviously things have come a long way since then. People at least now use on base percentage more than batting average, and Cy Young awards are actually being given out now to pitchers with good ERAs, not just someone that wins 20 games. But they've, of course, gotten much more modern statistics now. What are some of the couple of the favorite ones you like to use when evaluating players?
Well, first, in almost all these cases, the stats do a great job, a better job of evaluating what the player has done so far. One, for instance, frequently this turns to BABIP. Obviously, is one of the things that we use a lot when we're just trying to evaluate. I actually use BABIP more, batting average and balls in play. I think more for roto purposes than I do for score sheet, believe it or not, because it doesn't factor in walks or anything like that. It's an imperfect stat too, I think, and I think we're seeing more and more of that these days. I think it's less predictive and more evaluative. I think you can use things like WAR. You can use whatever your favorite. If you want to do wins above replacement, or you want to, use whatever metric you can use. It's out there. I'll be honest. I am not as well versed as I should be on all the new metrics that are out there. I support them all, but I'm not necessarily conversant in them, if you know what I mean. I try to learn here and there as I pick up, but I will. The first thing with pitchers is just I still go old school. I still look at strikeouts almost more than anything else. I think you can find breakout guys every year, finding guys that for whatever reason struggle but still miss bats. Bud Norris this year, Gio Gonzalez last year, imperfect guys. Sure, they walk too many in some situations, but those are the guys that are going to have the most explosive growth potential, I found, more often than not.
If I'm not really going into depth on someone for pitchers, that's certainly the one stat I look at the most when I'm trying to decide if I want to trade for someone or draft someone in the preseason. It's just their simple strikeout per inning pitched ratio.
Yeah, that's the first thing. I mean, when I'm looking at pitchers, I'm trying to do more where I'm also paying attention to more scouting reports as I can. Because I think that sometimes you can get a better idea of what a guy's ceiling is going to be. I think that there's still, I think there's been a lot more that's been done in terms of making that sort of information more widely publicly available than there has been in the past. Certainly with all the pitch FX stuff, you can kind of do some of that on your own in terms of like radar readings, movement of pitches, and things like that. But also just trying to, find out where you think, scouts are wrong too sometimes, but at the same time, it gives you an idea of what could happen. We always talk about what could go right, not necessarily what has he done so far, but what, envision the scenario where a guy could break out, and you can kind of capture some guys. You're still not going to ever anticipate a Jose Bautista-like explosion, but you can sometimes use that to help you find the next guy.
Yeah, I think, when that Moneyball came out and there was the big argument, well, should we use stats or should we use scouts? It does seem like there's more and more folks these days that realize, well, you should use both.
Right, of course. Oh, and unfortunately, and Moneyball is an awesome book still, but the way some of those scouts in particular were portrayed wasn't great. Also, I think the general public interpretation of Moneyball has really skewed the conversation. It's really about maximizing inefficiencies, whereas a lot of people are like, oh, it's all about on-base percentage. And then they could brush it off and go on from there. And from that, and because it was contentious to a certain extent, the real good takeaways from the book were kind of lost in translation sometimes to the general consuming public. I think that's the case. I mean, it sounds, I hesitate to try to sound elitist, like I have a better interpretation than someone else, but I do hear people that haven't read the whole book, but they read one excerpt, or they hear interpretation of it and just brush it off. And so, it's more of an interesting read than it is an instruction manual.
I thought it was one of those books I did not put down. I was actually on a camping trip when I picked it up, and I really didn't do anything for 24 hours except read Moneyball.
Oh, it's a fantastic read. I mean, it's really entertaining, and of course, Michael Lewis is a fantastic writer.
Yeah, and you're also right. I think he portrayed scouts, I think, partly to sell the book, to be entertaining, because I don't think he thought that badly about scouts, nor the front office people did.
Right.
Yeah, we both have friends, Jason Gray, Derek McCamey, people like that combine scouting, have gone to the scout school, and are statistics guys, and I think it makes them fairly valuable when you ask them about a player.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think there's been movement on both sides. I know we have former scout Bernie Pleskoff writing for us, and he still comes from a less numeric point of view, but at the same token, I mean, he enthusiastically endorses ways to try to learn more about his craft, and that's what I like. And I think I've seen more movement from that side of the community as well. So I think we're at an interesting point in time intellectually.
Yeah, I just wish that the Giants would seem a little more. They seem. Brian Sabian still seems to me a little bit to trade or especially sign for big contracts guys based on what they did a few years ago, which is fine if you're playing Stratomatic, like you said, but isn't so great given that what really matters is what they're gonna do.
Right, right. And I am not, I'm not privy to, like insider talk in that up front office to know how hostile he is to new metrics. I've heard rumors here and there that they are, but I'm sure that's overplayed to a certain extent too. And you would figure that, he'd learn, he's learned from his mistakes like everyone else. I mean, the fact is he just won a World Series, so he can always say just scoreboard. I mean, the fact is they've drafted well, they've gotten all these great pitchers. Takes you a long way. And that instructive though is you'll notice that all their solid starting pitching has been developed from within. When they've gone outside the organization for these big high-profile signings, it's been more of a bust.
Barry Zito?
Yeah, that's exactly Barry Zito, and then Aaron Rowan on the hitting side. They need to. There's with Belt and with Posey and now hopefully Belt, they're starting to develop their own hitters. For the longest time, they just didn't draft hitters very well or develop hitters very well. But maybe that's turning around a little bit too.
Yeah. You and I down at that Ron Chandler's AFL, we saw Lance Niekro come through there, I think, 4 years in a row.
Exactly. He's your Gookie Dawkins. The Reds had Gookie Dawkins. You guys had Lance Niekro.
Yeah, but, they were supposedly sending their best prospects to the Arizona Fall League, and every year he was the guy. That didn't work well. But, like you said, the Giants, as a Giants fan, I need to remind myself that they won a World Series last year, so I should be basking in that glow for a while yet.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Flags fly forever. Enjoy it. I was just happy to make a playoff berth, and my team make a playoff berth. And I'll focus on that instead of the last week and a half of gut punches. But that's all right. As a Reds fan, that is. Yeah.
Well, I think the Reds has some very good players, so you should have a few years of.
Oh, I like the team. I just don't like how they're running right now, and it's Philly always finds a way to shiv us in the back. So anyhow.
Yeah, that's probably true, but. Yeah, they're looking good. And then lastly, I did read you have that article on the web every week where you talk with Chris Liss about things, and you were talking about your Bautista trade where you got, there are a couple other parts thrown in, but basically you traded Jose Bautista for John Lester and Jared Weaver. And I don't want to jinx you saying good things about the trade and then have Lester fall off a cliff, but it sure seemed to me like a trade that will benefit you.
Oh yeah. Well, and here's the thing. The background on this is AL Tout Wars. It's a roto league, not a score sheet league, first of all. But the idea is, how do you properly value Jose Bautista? I bought him for $27 on a $260 budget at the auction. So I was kind of drinking the Kool-Aid to begin with, although I didn't drink enough of it. I only had him projected for 38 homers, I think, and clearly I think he's going to surpass that. I thought I was being the aggressive one, and he showed us what aggressive really is. But anyhow, I'm doing really, really well in the hitting categories, 59 out of the 60 hitting points. My pitching is a disaster, though. I made some big mistakes along the way. Tried to go cheap on closers. Another reason why I hate chasing saves is, you have to make these hard decisions, invest real money on crappy pitchers, and it didn't work out so well. So I'm chasing saves. I bought Francisco Liriano, and that hasn't worked out so well either. So I'm hurting in pitching categories. And I feel like I could afford to give up some power. I tried to give up Adrian Beltre for Lester straight up. Didn't work out so well. Instead, made an on-air trade on Wednesday. Traded Bautista for John Lester and Jared Weaver. And I'm sure Weaver is going to fall back to the pack a little bit. But it's basically, I feel pretty good that I'm trading away roughly $35 to $40 worth of value, getting back 45 to 50, hopefully. So we'll see. The idea for me, though, is how hard, the one thing I want to know is, and I think it's even harder in score sheet than it probably is in roto, what is Jose Bautista's real value? Well, what real trade value? How can you extract real good value from Bautista? In a score sheet league, that trade would never happen because starting pitching is so much more valuable than it is when you're dealing with counting stats, I think. But what is his true value? What can you get for him? And I'm sure last year if you lucked into him, it was really hard to get anything of value. Now that we've got basically a season and a half worth of data, if you count September 2009 and 2 months here, how much do you believe in him now? What are you willing to give up? I'm sure it's not straight up challenge trade of Bautista for an elite hitter. It's going to be harder to do. It's going to be more matching your needs. But I wonder what sort of trades are going out there in score sheet leagues for Bautista.
I think he's in some trades getting valued as would be one of the top couple picks if they had a draft today, especially since he has third base eligibility this year now.
How early would you draft him?
Wow. Well, I think, of course, it depends whether it's a continuing keeper league or if it's a redraft league.
Right.
I think if it's in a one-year league, I'd be tempted to draft him first or second, knowing I could play him at third base this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think I'd still be comfortable. I'd rather have Troy Tulowitzki first before anybody, I think.
Right.
Just because shortstops are so
I was thinking
scarce.
AL only. But yeah, combined league, yeah. So
combined. Oh yeah, AL only. Yeah, I'd probably. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think, and especially in a continuing league, it'd be a little bit more difficult. But that's a really good call. I mean, that's a tough call. I'm trying to look up to see where he went. We did. I'm in AL Phillips. It's a continuing league, but it just started anew this year.
Right.
And trying to see how early he went in this draft because he went in the fourth round of like 4.4 in an AL only. We have one unique thing there. We brought over like 12 NL players to the player pool. So we have some built-in crossover. So like Tulo and Hanley were brought in. Pujols was brought in. So that's interesting. But the question is, do you take Bautista or do you take someone like King Felix? I mean, you certainly don't take Joe Mauer now. I know a lot of people were taking him early in drafts this year. Do you look at Adrian Gonzalez or Miggy Cabrera? I think Miggy Cabrera versus Jose Bautista is an interesting discussion. I mean, the fact is, you like you mentioned, the third base eligibility changes that a little bit. But that's, Miggy is about as safe as it gets as a hitter right now, and he's young enough that you're going to hold on to him forever, too.
Yeah, when I say he's not quite as valuable in a keeper league, it's not that he's old. It's just, in continuing leagues, I really like the positional scarcity guys.
Would you take Cano over him then?
Yeah, for some reason I've never been a huge Cano fan, though. I don't know why. He actually won a title for me in my local AL 2 years ago, and I took him, and he had that huge year. I was just wondering whether in a one-year league that drafted right now and all that mattered was the rest of this season, would you take Pujols or would you take Bautista if you're in a combined league?
I'd probably take Pujols still, but I'm very stubborn that way. Unless Pujols is injured and he's playing through an injury, I can't imagine him not going back to what he's done since ad infinitum, since the beginning of time, basically.
Since the day he came to the major leagues.
Yeah, he hasn't. Sure, there's a question about his age, but I don't think he would drop off that starkly anyhow. I'm relatively optimistic that you're going to see old Pujols soon enough.
Yeah, I don't think anyone that has Pujols on their team is even considering doing a trade him away now when his value is a little lower.
Exactly.
I think you'd still have to give the farm to get him. But even to have the question be posed of whether you would take Pujols or Bautista, that would have been ludicrous just a couple months ago, more or less a year ago.
Right. And I want to know if now if you would make your projection today, like what numbers would you give for him? The thing that to me that's so interesting is the way he's getting pitched this year. He's Aura Walker to begin with. Now he's at this point now where he's in this zone where they just will not touch him. I mean, pitchers are going to pitch around now. When Lynn gets back, maybe that'll change things a little bit, but he's getting kind of that Bonds treatment. He's kind of locked in like him, and he gets that one pitch and he does something with it almost every time.
It is amazing given that Toronto's lineup is not exactly the murderer's row.
Right, exactly.
And how many balls he's getting thrown, how well he's doing. It's like you said, if you figure that the last month of 2009, he's got a season and a half, it's clearly no longer a fluke. It's also amazing how it just shows how hard it is to predict what a baseball player is going to do. I don't think there was a single person at the start of 2010 that said over the next season and a half Jose Bautista would be the best hitter in baseball.
No, of course not. And that's what. But he is such a unique story too. I mean, to break out at his age with so many accumulated at bats, That's the thing to me that makes this such a good story. And sure, you're going to hear some, PED rumblings. Nothing makes me more upset, actually, to say outright that, yeah, he's doing it because there's zero proof other than his stats. That's the thing that really bothers me. Because he goes through the testing program like every other player in baseball. So unless he's found this super drug that nobody else has found, or and is undetectable, it seems to me like it doesn't logically fit that he'd be the only one using that, and he'd be the only one to be not go get caught either there. So to me, it's upsetting when I hear PED speculation with him.
No, I agree. There's no, because like you said, it's not like someone is coming out and saying I saw him do it. It's just the only reason people are saying that is because they want some explanation for why he's hitting so many home runs, and it just seems just as likely, or probably far more likely, that he's just made some adjustments to his batting and he's just killing the ball because he's a good hitter.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I hope that trade works out for you. Pitchers are hard to predict. I mean, that's the problem with trading a top hitter for a pitcher, but you got two really good pitchers.
Well, yeah, that's sort of the idea, too, is that it's not like I got one and one like 1.5. I got two aces. If one regresses, fine, then I still have a chance to make out okay in the deal. But if both crap out, well, then so be it. That's baseball too. So I'll take my chances with that, though. I'm happy with the trade. We'll see if it works out now.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. We're all playing fantasy baseball for fun, unless you're going to win $100,000 somehow, in one of these national championships. Most of us play for fun. And to me, and I think to most people, if you can make a huge trade like that, it's just plain fun.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that I was able to do it on air, all the better.
Yeah, with a friend of yours on air with, however many people listening, that's just a kick in the pants.
Tens of people listening, maybe even 20s.
You got Sirius, you've got 1 million people listening to you.
I'm sure that's not true, but that's okay. Who knows? I have no idea. The thing is, I have no idea how many people are listening to the show. It's a good audience, though. I'm pretty happy with that.
It is nice to see, though. I mean, fantasy is definitely, since the days you and I started, it's come a long way. It's pretty mainstream. ESPN, of course, promotes fantasy constantly, and Sirius has an entire radio channel devoted to fantasy. It's kind of nice to see. Exactly.
And, I have to say that it's changed so much from when we started, and I don't have to explain to people what I do anymore, more often than not. Maybe my parents' generation every once in a while, but almost everyone has at least heard of fantasy sports now. Maybe they don't play it, maybe they've never played it, but it's not so mind-boggling that I work in the fantasy sports industry and do it for a living.
No, I can remember when we started in '87, I was reading, for some reason, we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago on how we started, so I was reading through some of our promotional stuff from the late '80s. Basically, the first page of the 4-page little brochure just explained what fantasy sports was. Spent a whole page doing that, and then we finally started saying, and by the way, you could play various different games, and here's why Score Sheet is different. And now I look at our promotional stuff, and there's virtually nothing explaining what fantasy is. It's much more of why are we different from other fantasy, because, like you said, we assume anyone that's a big enough sports fan to have any interest in playing fantasy already knows what fantasy sports is.
Right. It's analogous to the coverage of poker events on ESPN. Remember when they first started broadcasting the World Series of Poker at the start of every broadcast? This is no limit Texas Hold'em. This is how it's played. You don't do that anymore. Everyone assumes that's just kind of that's the way. It's like you don't have to start a baseball broadcast with these are the rules of baseball. I mean, we've grown in that way. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I think, that part you said about telling people I make a living playing running a fantasy sports company or providing fantasy sports content, whatever. People do kind of understand that you're not just making $10 a year and flipping baseball cards or something. They understand that it's like any other entertainment business. There's a lot of people doing it, and there has to be someone providing the services.
Exactly right.
Huh. Well, Jeff, it's been great talking to you, as always. And I want to thank you. And for you folks, rotowire.com I think you guys were the very first of these websites that kind of gave instant player news, weren't you?
Yeah, at least in this format, Bob Stahl had something on his service, but it was more of kind of an email newsletter. But we're the first to have the side-by-side player analysis and build up that player database, who's hurt, how long they're out. Starting to search those, the online newspapers. It was right when everyone was getting those AOL discs to try out AOL, so they could get internet access at home for the first time. We just caught lightning in a bottle at the right time.
Yeah, like everyone in the fantasy world, you guys have come a long ways. It's certainly no longer just click on a player to see if he's on the DL today or not.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, so for anyone that wants to kind of check out what RotoWire is doing, they've got analysis on players and a ton of great authors writing articles, up-to-the-minute news on players. So check out rotowire.com and you can send Jeff Erickson a question if you want.
Very good.
Hey, thanks for being on, Jeff.
Anytime, Jeff. Take care.
All right, you too.